Good morning, everybody. This is Jessica Flutie from the Skull Foundation team, and I'm super excited to join you for this virtual Skull World Forum Week event hosted by our partners at Global Witness. I am the curator of the Skull World Forum, and so usually I spend most of my year planning for this event that takes place each spring in Oxford, England. It brings together more than 1,200 people from across the social entrepreneurship and philanthropy and social change landscape for a week of learning and networking. But this year, due to coronavirus, unfortunately, we were forced to cancel the forum. But our theme that we had decided on was collective strength. And so in the face of the coronavirus, this sort of world war that I feel like we are all facing, but we're all on the same side. We invited our network of amazing social change agents from across the world to create a new open sourced Skull World Forum online. And we were totally blown away by the response to that invitation. We've had now more than 100 organizations contribute 140 different events to the week that is now concluding this Friday. So it really is a display of collective strength, and it has been a really amazing week of conversations, of learning, and we're just so thrilled that Global Witness is also taking part in this week with this event today. This was one of a few sessions where I had actually lined up Rachel and Larry, who are speaking today, to discuss some of this same story that you'll hear in Oxford. And so we're just thrilled that they're finding a way to get the story out to many of you in this virtual form. So this is the final day of Skull World Forum Virtual Week. We thank you, those who have been participating other days. And if you weren't, you can find much of the content and video on skull.org. And today is the final day. And so we're just so thrilled and look forward to seeing many of you at events taking place later today. There's even a dance party if you're ready to shake loose after a week of working. So with that, I'd love to turn it back over to our partners at Global Witness, and just thanks again for participating.
So what I wanted to say firstly was thank you to Jessica for that warm welcome, and thank you to you all for joining us today, and especially to Skull for giving us this opportunity to participate in their first online World Forum. I'm particularly pleased that with the help of technology, we're able to deliver this event today despite the global challenges the world is currently facing. My name is Mike Davis, and I'm the CEO of Global Witness. For over 25 years, we've been confronting corruption and the systems that enable it to protect both human rights and the environment. Today, we're going to be talking about a campaign that's been at the center of our work for almost a decade. This is the story of a Nigerian oil field and a global scramble by private individuals and firms to profit from this natural resource, with the Nigerian people not getting their fair share. Working alongside HEDA, Raycommon, Corner House, and other partners, we fought to uncover the truth of this deal for Nigeria's OPL5 oil license by exposing the dodgy dealings that underpinned it and fighting for accountability for those who perpetrated it. I'm delighted that two of our partners in this work will also be addressing you here today. We're really proud to have worked with so many partners around the world in the pursuit of truth and justice, because at the heart of this heist, there are real victims, the people of Nigeria. This is a deal that began with over $1 billion being secretly diverted from Nigeria's state coffers into private hands, and that's equivalent to more than the country's health budget at the time. More recently, we discovered that the actual cost to Nigeria could be much higher. If this oil field, one of the most promising in West Africa, is developed on the terms of this deal, Nigerians would lose out on an estimated $5.8 billion compared to under standard contractual terms. Now that's twice the health and education budgets combined in a country where 1 in 10 children don't live to see their 5th birthday. So this matters, and we're pleased that our investigation has triggered the authorities to return $70 million to Nigeria, the Nigerian government issuing a demand in court to cancel the deal, and a corporate corruption trial of unprecedented scale, with senior executives at Shell and Eni facing jail time. And in turn, this single corrupt deal has highlighted so many of the systemic flaws in our global structures, becoming a touchstone case study for our work on a range of issues, including transparency in natural resource deals, law enforcement collaboration, anti-money laundering, and accountability. I should note that criminal trials are ongoing, and everybody involved has denied wrongdoing and pleaded innocent, and the matter is now in the hands of the courts. As our talk proceeds, my colleagues will be mentioning what the subjects of this investigation have had to say in response to the allegations against them. More detail on their positions can be found on the Global Witness website, our reports on the case, and on the websites of Shell, Eni, former Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan, and others. Today, you'll hear from our lead campaigner on this case, Barnaby Pace, who will set the scene. Ava Lee, our senior campaigner, will talk about following the money. Suraju from HEDA will explain what this all means for Nigeria, before Antonio Tricarico from Raycommon in Italy will discuss where the criminal cases have reached. Lastly, but not least, the head of our EU office, Rachel Owens, will discuss how we are fighting to change systems to make stories like this one a thing of the past. There will be a 15-minute question and answer session at the end. Some of you have already submitted questions when you signed on. Thank you for those. You can also ask questions during the presentation via the box at the bottom right of your screen. And you can use the same chat box to alert us to any issues with sound or display as we go along. We'll moderate questions so that any that could be libelous or otherwise create legal risk will not be displayed publicly or put to the panel, and only panelists will be able to speak. If we don't have time to answer all your questions, we'll endeavour to do so in a follow-up blog. Without further ado, I'll hand over now to Barnaby to kick things off.
Thanks for that, Mike. So, the story behind OPL5 starts here in Nigeria with this man, Chief Dauziya Lawyer Etete, better known as Dan Etete. In 1998, Dan Etete was the oil minister for the military regime of Sani Abacha, and in April of that year, the government issued a series of licenses to explore for oil off the coast. Oil Prospecting License 245, or OPL245 as we call it, was issued to a company called Malibu Oil and Gas. The upfront price for buying the rights, known as the signature bonus, was $20 million. There was no bidding process involved, and later on Malibu couldn't even produce the letter they were supposed to have written applying for the license. This perhaps isn't surprising, because Malibu had only been incorporated 5 days before they received the license. The names on the corporate registry for the company were fake. The real owners were Mohammed Abacha, the son of the president, and Dan Etete himself. Less than 2 months after Malibu had obtained the license, Sani Abacha died suddenly, and so Dan Etete was out of a job, and Malibu couldn't come up with the $20 million, missing the deadline for paying. They needed to partner with an oil company, one able to front them the cash they needed, and do all the actual work exploring the oil block. That company, in this case, was Shell. And in 2001, Shell agreed to pay a total of around $150 million for a 40% stake in the license. However, just at this moment, the Nigerian government, then under President Obasanjo, revoked the OPL245 license. A presidential spokesperson was quoted in the press saying, Etete and Abacha had abused their positions in the past, while in office, to award themselves the OPL245 at a ridiculously low price. Shell initially objected, but soon afterwards got a new contract to work the OPL245 license without Malibu, agreeing to better contractual terms for Nigeria and a $210 million signature bonus. Shell started drilling the block over the next few years, between 2003 and 2006, and realized that this, in fact, was one of the most promising oil fields off the coast of West Africa. Meanwhile, Malibu starts suing the Nigerian government, saying the block was wrongly taken away from them. Malibu loses the court case. They appeal, but before the case is even heard, the then Nigerian Attorney General in Obasanjo's government agrees a controversial settlement, taking the block off Shell and returning it to Malibu, with the condition that Malibu has a few months to pay the $210 million signature bonus that Shell had agreed to. Shell now sues the Nigerian government, saying the block has now been taken wrongly off them. Meanwhile, Dan Etete and Malibu are back to step one. They need to find a buyer to pay the $210 million signature bonus and actually produce any oil at the end of the day. Etete's reputation, already problematic, takes a nosedive in 2007 when the Paris courts convict him of money laundering. The court found that while in office, he took bribes from multiple oil companies, which he laundered into Europe, spending it on a French chateau, a speedboat, and settling bills at the Ritz. So Etete hires middlemen, approaches every oil company he can, but between his reputation and Shell's ongoing lawsuit, nobody will touch this deal. Behind the scenes, Shell sees their opportunity to settle quietly with Etete and get the block back, and they meet directly with him several times. Etete, though, wants more money than Shell is willing to offer. In 2010, Eni, Italy's part state-owned massive oil company, enters the scene with willing to do a joint deal with Shell and put up a lot of cash. General Mohammed Adoki step in. In Adoki's office, government officials, Shell, Eni, and Malibu all sit around the same table and agree a deal, signed in April 2011. Shell and Eni agree to pay the long overdue $210 million to the Nigerian government and an additional $1.1 billion. The company said that this money was a payment to the Nigerian government, but that's where we started digging. Two middlemen who Etete refused to pay sued. From their court filings and other sources, we started to discover how this deal really went down. Shell and Eni had constructed separate contracts, sending their $1.3 billion in total payment to Nigerian government accounts in exchange for the license and dropping the legal cases, while Malibu had a different contract agreeing with the government that they should receive $1.1 billion in exchange for the block. Shell and Eni claimed publicly not to know that Dan Etete was the owner of Malibu, and that their payment of the $1.1 billion was only for the Nigerian government. However, a few years ago, our groups and a number of journalists were able to publish a range of leaked internal emails from the companies about this deal. Privately, executives at both companies understood Etete's involvement. In Shell's case, they'd known for over a decade, actually. This email was sent to Shell's Peter Voser and other senior managers, some of them still at the company. It read, Etete can smell the money. If at nearly 70 years old, he does turn his nose up at 1.2 billion, he is completely certifiable, and we should probably then just hold out until nature takes its course with him. But I think he knows it's his for the taking. This shows that knowledge of Etete's role in Malibu and that the payment was destined to him went right to the top of Shell. A British court ruled that Etete was in fact the true owner of Malibu, all the way back in 2013, but it took us publishing these emails 4 years later for Shell to finally admit in 2017 that they did in fact understand that Etete was involved and that his company Malibu would receive the $1.1 billion they paid. Here's their quote from the day after we published their emails. This really is a remarkable statement. Shell admitted that it knew its billion-dollar payment was going to a convicted money launderer for this deal. I should reiterate that Shell and Eni continue to emphasize that they believe this deal was legal, and they frequently still mention that the deal was agreed with the Nigerian government. This next email comes from 2009, and here Shell's staff on the ground, two former MI6 agents actually, are telling their manager, the head of Sub-Saharan Africa for Shell, about a conversation with a source of theirs about the $300 million offer they had made to Malibu. E here appears to stand for Etete. You'll see it says, she says E, Etete, claims he will only get $40 million of the $300 million we're offering. Rest goes in paying people off. In this next email, Shell managers are discussing a letter given to Etete by the president, asserting that Malibu still controls OPL5, despite them being late on the signature bonus and everything else. You'll see the end of it reads, this letter clearly an attempt to deliver significant revenues to GLJ as part of any transaction. GLJ appears to stand for Good Luck Jonathan, Nigeria's then president. This next extract comes from a briefing that was prepared for Malcolm Brinded, Shell's head of exploration and production at the time, one of the most senior executives in the whole company. And as you can see, it talks about political contributions that will flow as a consequence of the payment to Malibu. Lastly, I'll leave you with this list. Italian prosecutors allege that the money that went to Malibu fueled a vast bribery scheme, and it was these Nigerian officials who were the recipients of cash. I should say they have all denied wrongdoing, and only one of them, Mohammed Adoki, the former Attorney General, is currently facing any charges. And I should say he has pleaded not guilty and again denied all wrongdoing. Now I'll hand over to Ava, who's going to talk us through how the money got moved.
Thanks so much, Barnaby and Mike. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the cash involved. Moving $1 billion around the world is no mean feat, and tracing this cash has been the biggest challenge for both campaigners and journalists like us, and also for law enforcement. First off, let's take a moment to actually think about the amount of money that was moving around the world. It would have been enough money to fund the entire Nigerian federal health budget. And as Mike said, that's in a country where 1 in 10 children don't live to see their 5th birthday. But rather than ending up in Nigerian state budgets where this money belonged, it was funneled through shell companies and into bank accounts with few questions asked. Shell and Eni were actually telling the truth when they said their $1.1 billion first flowed to accounts opened by Nigerian government officials. There wasn't an account that would feed into the national budget. A special account for the transaction had been set up at JP Morgan in London. From JP Morgan, Malibu asked for the money to be moved into an account in Switzerland at Banca della Svizzera Italiana, which belonged to a middleman's Canadian firm. Now, BSI Lugano doesn't have a great reputation. It was eventually shut down as a result of its involvement in the Malaysian 1MDB scandal. However, even BSI Lugano turned the money down, refusing to accept the transfer, as it said it couldn't take any money that was associated with Dana Tete. JP Morgan then did file a suspicious activity report, notifying UK authorities that there might be something amiss with the transaction. But UK authorities receive over 460,000 of these reports each year. They currently have over 2 million on their database, and they simply don't have the resources to investigate all of them at the moment. Next, JP Morgan tried to move the money to a Lebanese bank, Bank Mizer Libar, but again, the bank refused to take the money. Finally, after both the European and the Middle Eastern banking options didn't work, JP Morgan transferred the OPL245 money to bank accounts belonging to Malibu at 2 Nigerian banks, First Bank Nigeria and Keystone Bank. The process by this point had taken so long that 2 middlemen had time to sue in both London and New York and managed to freeze money that they claimed were unpaid commissions for their work. This meant only $875 million made it to Malibu's accounts in Nigeria. From there, it gets very interesting. The money was transferred onto 5 other companies, justified by extraordinarily brief-looking invoices. These 5 companies were all initially controlled by one man, Aliyu Abubakar. Abubakar is a Nigerian businessman who's since been accused by prosecutors of acting as an agent in the deal for Goodluck Jonathan, the then president. I should note here that Jonathan, through a spokesperson, has called the case a fabricated bribery claim and said he did not ask for or collect any bribes. From these companies, over $520 million was then turned into cash by banks and money changers in Abuja. And let's just take a moment to really think about that. $500 million in $100 bills would weigh over 5 tons. You'd need 5 pickup trucks to carry it. So it's quite mind-boggling to think about how all of this money was moving through money changers and banks in Abuja. Prosecutors allege that the cash went towards paying Nigerian officials, including Mohammed Adoki, the former Attorney General that Barnaby was just speaking about, under the guise of a property transaction. He's been criminally charged in Nigeria, but he denies any wrongdoing and claims it was a completely normal property deal. Adoki recently released his memoirs, which cover his arguments on this matter at great length. So if you'd like to know more, you can go and buy his book. Etete recently gave an interview denying the allegations against him and said, "Where's the evidence? Where's the money Jonathan received from Malibu? Jonathan comes from the same state as me. I knew him much too well to corrupt him. And I wonder what right the Italian court can stick its nose in Nigeria, a sovereign state. This block is the property of the Nigerian government, not that of the Italian government and its prosecutor." But back to our investigation. So property and luxury goods have long been a theme in our work. And in this case, we see many of the same trends. The reality is that people don't get involved in corrupt deals for fun. They do it to secure a certain kind of lifestyle for themselves and for their families, usually somewhere far away from where they're stealing the money. And Dan Etete did exactly that. He took control of the companies and used his cut to pay for a pretty extraordinarily luxurious lifestyle. Hunting trips, armoured cars, and even a private jet he bought in the US and, a la Lewis Hamilton, registered in the Isle of Man. It also looks as if he managed to buy exclusive properties in a number of cities around the world. In particular, it's been reported that Dan Etete spent millions of dollars buying and furnishing an apartment in the Dubai Marina, as well as a mansion and an exclusive area dubbed the Beverly Hills of Dubai. And you can just imagine the kind of dinner parties that happen over there. He reportedly shares the neighborhood with members of the Mugabe, Shinawatra, Bhutto, and Gupta families. So that's a roundup of some of the places that this money ended up. And now I'm going to hand over to Lamre, who's going to be talking about what's been happening in Nigeria to get that money back to where it really belongs.
Let's move for a second to the investigations, and then we try to go back to the Nigerian context. And our work has helped trigger investigation into the OPL245 case in at least 6 countries: Nigeria, Switzerland, UK, US, the Netherlands, and Italy. And among these investigations, the work of public prosecutors has gone furthest and fastest in Italy. Unlike the US or UK, Italy also has a track record of very independent prosecutors who are not afraid to take high-profile cases to trial. The lead prosecutor in Milan, Fabio De Pasquale, has previously prosecuted Italian prime ministers. This is one of the reasons this case has become so remarkable, not just because of the vast scale of the alleged bribery scheme and the seniority of the figures involved, but the prospect of some real accountability. For too long, justice for similar white-collar crime cases has meant a financial settlement with companies who can afford it, and may merely treat it as a cost of doing business. The details of such cases rarely become fully public without a trial, and the rare few individuals who do face personal accountability are usually relatively junior. The major trial in Milan started hearing evidence in September 2018, and between Rick Harmon, Global Witness, and our partners, we have been at nearly every hearing, live tweeting and ensuring its cover in the press internationally. The coverage has generated vast numbers of articles and many millions of views. The trial was scheduled to be moving into concluding arguments in the last week, but given the coronavirus crisis, we may have to wait a little longer for the case to have its last few hearings. Let me stress that without brave prosecutors who have been tough enough to overcome the many obstacles and sometimes limited political will in pursuing international criminal cooperation in a massive case like this one, this historical trial against Annie Shell would not have happened. They have refused to give up despite these challenges. Regardless of the outcome, the fact that this vast grand corruption case has been brought to a public trial is already a landmark success for accountability. Shell and Annie, as corporations, are standing trial in the case, and if they are found guilty, they are facing fines and a potentially gigantic claim for damages from Nigeria, which is represented by lawyers in the trial as the victim of the alleged crime. This sets an important precedent, as has the good international cooperation which has happened between Italy and Nigeria, and which we as international civil society have encouraged. Among the individual defendants in court are Malcolm Brinded, former number 2 at Shell, Peter Robinson and the two former MI6 agents Colpaston and Colgate. For Eni, their current and former CEOs, Claudio Descalzi and Paolo Scaroni, are both on trial alongside several other executives, as well as several middlemen and Danny Teta himself. The individuals all face 7-year jail terms. They have all pleaded innocent and the trial is ongoing. The trial has certainly not been without drama, with prosecutors telling the court this year that they believe that any executive sought to interfere with the testimony of witnesses, attempting to bribe one, while they also claim that the company ordered surveillance against journalists, prosecutors themselves, and possibly even judges. A separate investigation is ongoing into allegations that the public prosecutor in Sicily was bribed to create fake investigation into critiques of Eni's CEO Claudio Descalzi, including the company's board members, and to try to interfere with the main anti-corruption investigation. While that investigation has already garnered convictions, Eni has said that it categorically denies ever having set up any kind of information gathering operations and consider itself a victim if any crime of obstruction were shown to have been committed. Our groups have also been investigating any deals elsewhere, as have Italian authorities. In the Republic of Congo, our investigation have uncovered evidence of corruption, while Claudio Descalzi himself has been accused of serious conflicts of interest after it was uncovered that Eni was in business with a company revealed to be owned by his wife. He has responded that he should merely have disclosed the link. Remarkably, Mr. Descalzi remains the CEO of the company, and this spring he may yet be reappointed by the Italian government, the company's major shareholder. As we say in Italy, don't wash your dirty linen in public. But even so, we've been disappointed that few international investors have raised any objection publicly. Elsewhere, Shell has announced that it expects to be prosecuted in one of its home jurisdictions, the Netherlands, where the investigation is still ongoing and both companies face possible action in the US. Coincidentally, both companies admitted their role in previous separate schemes in Nigeria in 2010. They both signed deferred prosecution agreements, essentially putting themselves on probation, while less than a year later, their most senior executives agreed to this OPL 245 deal. This in itself raises serious questions whether the US model or our court settlements are truly effective at deterring wrongdoing, but also raises questions about what approach the US could take if the companies were convicted in Milan. Shell, in this year's annual report, put it simply that a finding that Shell had violated anti-bribery law could have a material adverse effect on our earnings, cash flows, and financial condition. They do, of course, still maintain that the deal was legal. Thank you. Let's try now to go back to Olanrewuju's intervention, if possible.
This deal is one of the many deals that hurts Nigerians. Nigeria has been, in theory, enjoying an oil boom in the 1960s, but little of that money has helped ordinary Nigerians. Nigerians have nevertheless been blighted by the environmental impacts of the industry. Many of those listening will remember the scenes of pollution in Niger Delta, made famous in the 1990s by the Ogoni movement and the judicial murder of the playwright and campaigner Ken Saro-Wiwa at the hands of the Apache regime. The figures in the story of OPL245 haven't changed much when we remember that Shell has had a major role in the environmental damage caused in Nigeria. Shell colluded with the regime in its persecution of the Nigerian people, and Danny Teta, as Abacha's oil minister, was a point man for the regime defending their murderous approach. The military regime of Abacha and calls to boycott Nigeria, but long gone by the environmental impact of the industry, are far more resolved, with many Nigerians living every day with polluted water and land. One key piece of work done by our groups has been to understand the true nature of the OPL 245 contracts. In Nigeria, contracts for oil deals are nearly always secretive, but we're fortunate in this case that the key documents have become public over the course of our investigations. That allowed us to hire industry experts at the Canadian consultancy Resources for Development. With their help, we found that the contract is incredibly unusual and closely resembles the type of contract that has not been given to international oil companies in Nigeria since the early 90s and the years of military rule. The contract excludes Nigeria from any share in the oil beyond taxes and royalties. This extraordinary deal was objected to by a brave Nigerian civil servant. Just 2 weeks before the contract was agreed, Nigeria's most senior civil servant in the Department of Petroleum Resources, Olanrewaju, wrote this letter. Obaji, over 9 pages, objected in extremely strong terms to the deal, highlighting its many flaws from the government's perspective. You see here a sign of saying that, in quote, agreement as proposed is highly prejudicial to the interests of the federal government, of quote. But government ministers appear to have overruled Mr. Obaji's warning. Our consultants were able to put numbers to just how prejudicial the deal is. In addition to the contracts, they were also able to use Shell and ENI's own plan for how much developing the oil block would cost, and use their most conservative estimates for how much oil might be present. Their model, which is free to use online, concluded that if the project went ahead, oil prices averaged $80 per barrel, that Nigeria will lose out on $5 billion compared to a standard contract in Nigeria at that time. To put that another way, the International Monetary Fund advises that a mature oil producing country like Nigeria should receive somewhere between 65 and 85% of profit from oil extraction. At the deal for this block, being on the basis of the standard Nigeria contractual arrangements around it since the mid-2000s, Nigeria would have received 65% of the profit. The deal that Shell and ENI signed in 2011 under a democratic government is projected to get Nigeria just 41% of the profit. ENI has responded saying this is an underestimate, but has refused to show their own workings. Shell's executive knew these deals strikingly favorable to the company. A discussion among their most senior managers was revealed in the leaked emails. Malcolm Brinded wrote to the company's CEO, chief financial officers until a few years ago, and Martin Westseller, currently head of Shell's massive gas business. Blinded told them the deal was unprecedented. Fortunately, Nigeria is now demanding that they should be able to cancel the deal as part of a lawsuit they have brought in English High Court against Shell and ENI, where they say they are the victim of fraud. An estimated $6 billion in losses to Nigeria from this one deal. Twice the federal health and education budget is vast, especially when we think of the current situations and the need to have a properly equipped health system to fight off coronavirus. However, this deal is not unique in Nigeria, where corrupt deals have frittered away funds for too long, hamstringing attempts to fight poverty, exacerbating inequalities and provoking conflicts. It is no coincidence that Nigerians make up one of the largest groups of people risking their lives by taking to boats across the Mediterranean to seek refuge in Europe. At HEDA, in addition to investigating this case, we've partnered to empower Nigerians to take these root causes themselves. We work with the government, journalists, civil society organizations, or members of the public to enable them to join in the fight against corruption. Working with our partners, we have helped others learn the skills to trace money around the world, understand oil contracts, and challenge corruption themselves. We've trained over 250 people in illicit tracing of funds and dozens in understanding oil contracts so that they can ask the government questions going forward. Accountability has also been a very key part of our campaign, and we're pleased to see progress in Nigeria. Mohamed Adoke, former Attorney General, who spent 4 years overseas in self-exile, was arrested recently by Interpol agents in Dubai last December and returned to Nigeria, where he faces trial now. Danny Tete, ENI, and Shell's Nigeria subsidiary, and several executives also face charges related to the case in Abuja, where it is important that justice is done to maintain Nigeria's integrity. case isn't just one of the biggest corporate bribery cases in history. It is also a case where a vast quantity of previously secret information like the Shell's emails have come into public domain. And for Nigerians, those emails raise numerous questions. Shell and ENI may not like us asking them, but we will continue to do so until we have answers. As someone who was imprisoned under the Abacha dictatorship, I know what state capture by kleptocrats is. But is it the kleptocrats in government who have captured the state? We should turn the lens on the companies and individuals paying bribes, who in turn have received state assets. During the Jonathan era, Shell did a number of massive deals with the companies that are linked to the ruling party. We should ask why. Why did Shell go ahead with the OPL245 deal when they themselves discussed the risk of the money going towards election washing? Like many Nigerians, I want to know whether the deals like OPL245 with such vast alleged bribery schemes are simply about a single oil deal, or are they part of a wider scheme to buy governments? When oil companies pay money that could end up as bribes, are they responding to corruption or actively corrupting because it is in their interest to corrupt? And if so, where is the front line in the fight against corruption now? In Nigeria, are the UK, the Netherlands, or Italy captured by oil companies? And if so, what are you doing about it?
Thanks so much to Olanrewaju, and I'm so glad that he was able to say his piece in the end that the technology works. So many thanks to all the speakers so far. We've heard how Global Witness and others and partners found the facts, exposed the truth, and worked tirelessly to ensure those responsible for this deal are held accountable. But our work has also been about changing the system that allows corrupt deals, such as the OPL245 deal, to flourish seemingly with impunity. Back in 2002, we conceived and together with partners co-founded the Publish What You Pay campaign, a global civil society movement working to ensure that revenues from oil, gas and mining help to improve people's lives. With more than 700 members and 50 national coalitions all around the world, Publish What You Pay campaigns for an open and accountable extractive sector. This movement has led to significant changes in global legal and policy frameworks. So from a policy perspective, the OPL245 case has been invaluable at explaining the need for several exciting developments over the last few years. The European Union has brought in rules requiring all oil, gas and mining companies to disclose their payments to governments on a project-by-project basis. This means that payments like Shell and Eni's $1 billion must now be disclosed and can then be tracked. In the concluding speech at the European Parliament, the lead legislator said that the rules must be strong enough to pass the OPL245 test. I was there in person to watch activists and politicians alike cheer with joy as the new rules were voted through. The US also brought in a similar law in 2010, so-called 1504 of the Dodd-Frank Act. However, that rule has yet to be fully implemented, following lawsuits by oil companies and more recently the American Petroleum Institute, a trade association representing oil majors. The American Petroleum Institute lobbied to roll back a strong implementing rule using a highly unusual congressional process back in 2017. This, as you'll remember, was just after President Trump was elected. A new implementing rule is currently under consultation, and we, together with our partners at Publish What You Pay, have been campaigning for a strong rule to properly enforce Section 1504 and to match the European transparency rules. The lessons from this case are still relevant as a powerful group of oil companies continue to try and water down the transparency we desperately need. This is despite the fact that some oil companies have in fact come out in favour of transparency measures. At Global Witness, we've also been campaigning for more than 10 years for key anti-money laundering measures to be brought in. Anonymously owned companies, as we heard earlier from Ava, are one of the key tools used by money launderers and tax evaders to hide their ill-gotten gains and taxable assets from law enforcement and tax inspectors. Public registers of real or beneficial owners of companies are are a way to make this more difficult. The UK has led the way in establishing a public register of the true or beneficial owners of companies. The EU also passed similar rules for its 27 member countries. These rules are a really important first step in increasing transparency, but improvements could still be made to make them stronger. For example, by lowering the threshold of ownership that needs to be disclosed, and through better data verification. But the most important thing is that many countries now have fully functioning public registers, which is really, really positive. Implementation is still patchy in some EU member states. And if you're interested in this, please check out our new report on the Global Witness website. In the UK and elsewhere, we've also campaigned for it to have a public register of property ownership to stop real estate being used as a vehicle for dirty money. The UK is committed to this, though we're still waiting for it to be unveiled. So to conclude, the OPL245 case is remarkable, as it's shown the many flaws in the international system meant to keep business clean and hold the corrupt to account. It's taken years of work to expose the wrongdoing in this one deal and prompt authorities to take action, despite the efforts of many first-rate officials to get justice. We are, however, left with the impression that much of the system is set up to fail, with impunity being a permanent feature, not just a bug in the system. And just to remind you, corruption isn't a victimless crime. Just because it's carried out by people in suits, carrying briefcases and working behind closed doors, doesn't mean it isn't a crime. Systemic corruption has real impacts on people's lives. It leads to people fleeing their homes and communities, as we heard from Lanre, severe lack of public funding for vital services, and dangerous conflict. So we hope that the prosecution of iconic cases such as this demonstrate that those entrusted with power, whether in government, banks, or big oil, think twice before assuming they can't be held to account. This case and the work of our campaigners and many brave partners and activists all around the world proves that they can be. Thank you so much for listening to all of us, and now I'll pass over to Mike for the question and answer session.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you to all of our speakers, Barnaby, Ava, Antonio, and Lanre. And thanks to all of you for sticking with us through that technical glitch. We're learning on this. We're looking forward to doing many more. But yeah, appreciate your patience there. So what we're going to do now is take some of the very thoughtful questions which people have sent in during and before this session. With the technology as it is, what we're going to do is I'm going to just ask the speakers to respond to questions, and I'm going to ask them in groups of 3. And so they'll then come in and give their answers, and then it will come back to me again, and we'll do another round. So the speakers, so the first 3 questions we're going to take on, which people have sent in, are these. So the first one is, how can Nigerian journalists be equipped to carry out such investigative assignments as this one? And I was wondering if Barnaby and then Lanre could speak to that. The next one is, what are the trends in enforcing foreign bribery laws? Is enforcement increasing outside of the USA? And Ava, perhaps this is something that you could speak to and maybe say a bit about anti-money laundering enforcement trends as well. And then thirdly, we have a question, is it possible to still have a trial in Nigeria for this same case? Could a further trial include people not indicted in Italy? Antonio, perhaps you could pick that one up. So I'm going to turn off my audio and camera now. So Barnaby and then Lanre, please, for the first one, Ava for the second, and Antonio for the third. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. So on the question of Nigerian journalists working on this, it's a really good question. And one of the challenges with doing short talks is we always have to simplify in places and not mention everything. But it's a really important point to mention that a lot of this case came from the work of Nigerian journalists. Especially, I should highlight the Premium Times in Nigeria, who were, the ones who elicited some of the quotes we showed in the presentation. and actually, I because I have the chance to see the questions in advance, which is a nice touch compared to a normal presentation, I actually pulled off my shelf a copy of a really good book that I'd highly recommend called African Muckraking, which highlights some of the best investigative journalism in Africa from like the last 75 years. And one of them is the Premium Times piece written by a guy called Idris Adekunbajo, who's an excellent journalist and now editor there, about the OPL5 case. And it's been recognized as one of these historic pieces of journalism. So that's the first point, is that actually Nigerian journalists are definitely part of the story and already doing that fantastic work. The second thing is that, yeah, there's always a need to learn better skills to trace funds, to investigate complex deals, and we all learn these as we go. But I'm sure Olanre can add as well. We've both been really lucky to participate in training courses and run training courses run by both our organisations and others out there, like Finance Uncovered being an excellent example, training journalists to do the kind of research into white-collar crime cases, into financial documents, into court documents, social media, and all the other skills that are really useful. And I know a lot of Nigerian journalists have been benefiting from those, and you can see it coming out in their work. Lanre, maybe you want to add on to that.
Is to acknowledge the support and also the transfer of knowledge that actually is between Global Witness, Corner House, HEDA, focusing most especially in the area of the capacity building I mentioned earlier on Nigerian journalists, researchers, activists, and even the law enforcement agencies. And most of the report with reference to the OPL5, especially, were actually launched in Nigeria with a view to not only make it public in Nigeria, but also to enhance the buy-in of Nigerian media and journalists in the process. It's been extremely difficult, considering also the war chest that you have with many of the oil companies. So competing for public space and attention in the Nigerian media wasn't an easy task, but we've started the process of enhancing the capacity of the journalists to also deal with some of the cases. And like Barnaby mentioned, some of Nigerian journalists were actively involved in also dealing with some of the investigation. And I really need to salute their courage in dealing with those issues, in networking between the law enforcement agencies and also other institutions that were of significant support in getting some of the information. The last one I would just want to chip in is definitely those that are not actually prosecuted in Italy for one reason or the other, either for policy reasons or legislative reasons, so, are also being prosecuted already in Nigeria. And EFCC is doing a tremendous work around that, which is why Danite Adoke was brought back to Nigeria from Dubai. Etete is being prosecuted in Nigeria, even though it's at large. And the same thing goes to some of the officials of the oil companies, including the oil companies. You will remember at some point, EFCC got a court order to revoke the license from the oil companies, but they were able to also hire some senior advocates to get the courts to vacate the revocation. But the case is still in progress. I thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lanre. So I think the next question was from me, which was around kind of trends in enforcing foreign bribery laws. So I think, as the person asking the question mentioned, like the US, is definitely still at the top of its game in this. The US just has a huge amount more money that they're willing to invest in pursuing these type of trials and type of investigations than we see kind of anywhere else in the world. But this case in particular, it's been really fantastic to see what's been happening in Italy, what we hope will be happening in the Netherlands soon, and the kind of cross-country collaborations that we've seen there too. And other jurisdictions are catching up, and there are new laws that are coming into force all around the world that should really, really help law enforcement in pursuing these types of cases. So particularly from Global Witness's perspective, we've been campaigning for a long time on public registers of the real owners of companies. So as you'll have seen throughout our presentations today, anonymous companies were really at the heart of how this worked and how it happened. There were all these anonymous companies that enabled the money to be siphoned off and sent to other places. So we now have supposedly registers of the real owners of companies across the whole of the EU. Some of them haven't been implemented as well as they should have been yet, but we're pursuing that and trying to make sure that they get up to speed. And we've also hopefully are going to have them in the UK's overseas territories by the end of this year. So that's places like the British Virgin Islands. Sorry, as we talk about law enforcement, you might be able to hear the police car going outside my window. It's gone now. So yeah, the British Virgin Islands, the Cayman Islands, they all should be opening up at the beginning of next year too. And you know, the UK has really been leading the fight in this way very much. And we also are hoping very soon to have an introduction of a register of the real owners of property here, which again has come up in this case a lot. I'll hand over to Antonio now to answer the next question.
That's good. I mean, the question was about whether you can also have trials in Nigeria or the jurisdiction while the criminal case is going on in court in Italy. Now, it's important to recall that the charges move against the two companies in Italy and several of their senior managers are primarily are just aggravated international corruption. Now, this is based on the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention, which basically extend the jurisdiction of Italy to go after those responsible for international corruption, but does exclude the public officials who were basically in office at the time of the crime. And according to the Milan prosecutors, the time of the crime goes up to 2014, from 2009 up to 2014. So that's why in Italy they could basically have charges against Danetete, who was not basically in office during the time of the crime, the alleged crime. And similarly, they could move actually additional charges against Aliyu Abubakar, who was not a public official. But they could not basically indict Adoke Bello nor anyone else. So in Nigeria, charges are broader in the sense that they are against on money laundering, fraud, and corruption. And secondly, of course, the then public officials in office are on trial, in particularly Adoke. But it's fair also to add that according to the bilateral agreement between Italy and Nigeria, there is no limitation in terms of double jeopardy. So theoretically, also on corruption, they could move the same. And the same is valid also between Italy and the US. So you don't have any double jeopardy principles in the international bilateral agreement between Italy and US. Concerning the Netherlands, our understanding is that prosecutors, also based on the complaints we filed in the Netherlands, are considering a wider set of charges. Of course, concerning the specific charge of international corruption, they could not move a similar case, the same case also in the Netherlands, in Rotterdam court. But they can move other cases concerning other charges. So I really hope I clarified that. Just to a very final addition, there was an investigation in the UK, but surprisingly, the NCA decided to close the investigations, and which, in our view, of course, poses a question about why the UK authorities also haven't moved forward on this specific case. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio. And before that, Ava and Lanray and Barnaby. The next question on the list is so lovely and obliging. I would really like to thank the person who sent it in. The only problem with it is it looks like I probably wrote it myself. And it is, what are some creative ways to make sure that organizations like Global Witness have sufficient resources to do our work? So that's a good cue for me, first of all, to thank very profoundly Those funders who support our work at the moment, Skoll is one of the most noteworthy, and of course they're doing us a huge favour by giving us a platform like this to elevate and share the word about the work that we're doing that they've supported. And other funders who are on this call too, thank you. Yes, we are always looking for more sources of funding for our work. We're just getting into a very exciting new strategic phase in which we're going to be looking with an even tighter focus at abuses of power driving climate crisis. We're going to be looking at the role of fossil fuels industries, agribusiness, destroying tropical forests, threats to environmental defenders, digital threats to democracy. So we are always looking for more sources of support. If you have any ideas, please do share. I would also say that I'm sure the same applies to Raycommon and HEDA. These are organisations like ours which do need support to do their work. But I'll make mention of one other kind of resource which we are always looking for more of, and participants on this call may have ideas there too, and that's information. We have an excellent data investigations team, which is about to get bigger, and they've been uncovering evidence of malfeasance and corruption in everything from the jade mines of Burma through to a Trump condominium in Panama, through to questionable dealings to do with cryptocurrencies. And in a period where it's going to get a little more difficult for us to do our more gumshoe style journalistic investigations out on the ground, we are going to be putting more of a premium on data investigations. For that, we need data. And if anyone has any thoughts on this, please contact us via Twitter, via our website. We also have a secure drop website, which you can find via Google for any materials which you feel that we should be examining. Right, we're going to move on to another round of questions now, and we've lost a bit of time due to the technical glitch earlier, but I think we can probably wrap this up within the next 5 to 10 minutes, so please do stick with us. Just give me 1 second. Okie doke. So the next questions for our speakers are, firstly, this one is for Lanre. With the falling oil prices and the shift to renewable energy, what is the future of the oil industry? What does this transition look like and sound like to communities in the Niger Delta and workers in the oil industry in Nigeria? Then the next question, perhaps Barnaby, you could take this one on, was about whether there was any relationship between the investigative work that we did on this case and the publication of EITI reports. That's reports under the auspices of the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, an international scheme. So whether there was any relationship between our investigation and EITI reports from Nigeria. And then one more question, which perhaps we could bring back to Lanre. Do you know of any case studies of highly participatory and successful oil and gas projects that have been beneficial for local communities? Okay.
Hi, I'll try and answer the EITI question quickly, especially as I see we're overrunning. So the question was if EITI reports had been useful in our investigations. For those who don't know, EITI stands for the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, which is now a global body that covers, I believe, over 50 countries and requires disclosure of payments to government. Governments take part and they disclose what payments they've received from oil, gas and mining companies, and civil society has an equal place at the table and is able to ask questions, which is probably the most powerful part of that process in my view. Someone in Texas said 52 countries, so yes, thank you, 52 countries. Nigeria has been a member of EITI for many years, like Lanre mentioned, and their reporting has been really useful in comparison of how this deal happened compared to other deals in the country. That said, Nigeria's oil industry in many ways is still very secretive, despite their membership of EITI. When we did our report and worked with our Canadian consultants that Lanre mentioned to do a report that ended up being called Take the Future, and you can find it on our website for all the detail about how we looked into the contracts behind OPL5 that Lanre was talking about in his section. It was really interesting to see what was and wasn't available from the rest of the sector, and things like contracts are still very secret. That said, it was really useful to be able to go back into old reports and see if the companies had disclosed their payment to the Nigerian government. The 1.1 billion, they had not. The $210 million, according to the EITI reports, had only been disclosed by the Ministry of Petroleum in Nigeria. So it is useful. I think the thing that's enhanced that Rachel mentioned is bringing in mandatory disclosures in Europe, in the US, and elsewhere, to require that information be given by law and set up penalties if that's misreported. And also, since then, the EITI standard has been considerably strengthened. But really, the biggest advantage is that civil society are able to ask those questions and are protected when they do that. One last thing I'll say on that, and then hand it back to Mike. A lot of I've seen a couple of questions I don't think we'll get to, but this plays into it. Are about where the documents can be found about this case and how you can read more and see the underlying documents. There's a couple of places. One, the Global Witness website, and we have our reports on this case and a lot of the associated documents, including the company's responses and others. And also there's a website called Shell and Any on Trial, which is run by our partners here, which has documents from the Italian court case and some of the other court cases. So anyone who'd like to look at those source documents can find them there. And then lastly, as court cases happen and so on, I've had the fun job of going to the courts and live tweeting them and talking about the cases as they've progressed. And so please do just follow me on Twitter as well, and you'll get rolling updates on top of what's on our website. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Barnaby. So I think we're pretty much at the end of our questions. We probably missed a few, but we are going to look to see if we can respond to some of the others in a follow-up log. So please do look out for that. So yeah, just in wrapping up, I've really enjoyed listening to the speakers, and it's great to be reminded of the case and learn a bit more about it. And I just wanted to share perhaps 3 observations in conclusion. So one is, if you're going to loot a country and rip off its citizens, you need to tap into the global corporate and financial architecture to do it. This is not just about weak governance in a global south country. None of this would have happened were it not for the greed of high-profile global companies and a cast of financiers and fixers. But more hopefully, it shows what can happen when citizens at different points on that global map of transactions come together to fight back and demand justice. And this seems a message to hold on to at a time when a global pandemic demands greater international collaboration, while at the same time threatening to fragment and erode even the most everyday human interactions with friends, neighbors, and colleagues. Thirdly, I wanted to say that this case is a microcosm of the abusive power of the oil and gas industries at a global level. This may, in some ways, stand out as a particular case of oil and gas majors getting involved in a scheme that undermines a country's development and democracy. But the reality is that these industries have their tentacles wrapped around governments the world over. Right now, as we hold this online event, fossil fuels industry lobby groups are busy lobbying in different parts of the world for politicians to turn over to them juicy chunks of taxpayers' money and to lower safeguards in the name of a coronavirus response. And this isn't just a threat to justice and development, it's pushing us down the road towards climate meltdown, locking in a model that's threatening our planet and that we don't even need. And that's why we at Global Witness, in the next stages of our journey, are going to be working ever harder to confront abuses of power that are driving climate crisis. We can only hope to succeed in doing that by building more partnerships and alliances like those we're honoured to have with our friends at HEDA, Recommon and Corner House. And I hope very much that some of you participating in this event will consider joining us on that journey. Thank you.